You stand on the deck, the sun beating down. Salt stings your lips. The wind carries the scent of rum and fear. In the distance, a Spanish frigate, black as a death sentence. You raise a white flag, but it's no use. Officers storm aboard, their boots clattering on the planks. One of them, Juan de Leon Fandino, grabs you by the hair, a knife at your ear, pain, searing like a hot coin. You feel your flesh tear. Your ear falls to the deck, blood streaming down your neck. You don't scream. You freeze. Your body shuts down, but your mind does not. For 7 years, you remain silent, holding the pain within. Then you come to London and lay the ear on the Parliament table, preserved in a jar of spirits, transparent as a lie. You would have believed it too, because it wasn't just an ear, it was a trigger. For years, Britain had endured robbery, murder, and the sinking of its ships. But the war only began now. Why? Because an ear is the perfect symbol, small, bloody, visible. It can be shown, it can be hated. The press inflates the story into an imperial tragedy. Barbarians are cutting off ears, the newspapers scream. No one asks why the British were sailing into foreign waters with holds full of contraband. No one remembers that London itself encouraged this risk. You are presented with an ear as evidence. But in reality, it's a smokescreen, behind which lies a struggle for markets, colonies, and control of the ocean. Yet talking about that is boring. It's easier to talk about honor, about pain, about your ear. Imagine it's your ship, your body, your fear. You too have been deceived. A real war never starts over a single ear. It begins when authorities find an image that makes you forget about money, interests, and lies. Jenkins's ear is the first biological meme in history, a piece of flesh turned into a weapon. And you look at it, and you want revenge. Without thinking, without asking, just revenge. Remember this moment because it works the same way today. One image, one groan, one tear, and millions believe. Not facts, not numbers, but pain, someone else's but presented as your own. Jenkins' ear is not absurd. It's a masterclass in manipulation, and it's still effective. You are a merchant from Bristol, 1735. Your ship sets sail not for salt or glory, but for profit. In the hold are textiles from Manchester, gunpowder from Portsmouth, glass from Birmingham, all prohibited in Spanish colonies. But in Jamaica, Cartagena, and Portobello, they await you. Buyers pay triple. You know when the patrols are asleep. You know whom to bribe with a silver purse. You know that London bankers have already recorded your cargo in their ledgers as an asset. This isn't piracy, it's business. Sharp, cold, profitable. But if the Spanish catch you, they won't read your invoices. To them, you are an enemy, and the punishment won't be for the goods but for the audacity. Over 70% of British exports to the Caribbean in the 1730s were contraband. Not a side activity, but the foundation. The empire signs treaties with Madrid, swearing to respect borders. But in reality, it sends ships with holds full of forbidden goods. Spain loses, by modern estimates, £20 million a year. The money flows directly into London banks. That's why Spanish coast guards are given the right to stop any vessel, not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. And the British Admiralty? It pays compensation to captains, like Jenkins in 1732, for the confiscated ship Rebecca, £450. This isn't solace, it's an investment. The Spanish don't strike at random. They know who is encroaching on their waters, purposefully and systematically. Cutting off an ear isn't madness, it's a message. You are violating order. You will pay. Jenkins knew the rules. He took the risk for profit. But in 1738, London pretends to hear of such barbarity for the first time, even though it had been paying for this risk for years, compensating, encouraging, and covering it up. If hundreds of sailors lost ears, hands, and lives, why did he become the symbol? Why did his jar of spirits ignite Parliament? Because by 1738, Britain was suffocating. The economy was sluggish. The people were apathetic. Politicians needed a catalyst. Not a war for markets, but a war for emotions. The ear was the perfect trigger. Small, bloody, visible. It could be placed on a table, pointed at, and make hearts skip a beat. You would have believed it too because they didn't show you a bill from a London bank. They showed you flesh and told you, this is honor, this is pain, this is a cause. But in reality, it was the price of contraband. and you had already paid it. April 1731. Cuban waters. Your ship, the Rebecca, drifts under full sail. You are Robert Jenkins, captain, merchant, gambler. In the hold are crates of cloth, gunpowder, and glass, all disguised as legitimate cargo. You are confident the papers are in order. But on the horizon, La Isabela, a Spanish frigate. Its cannons are already aimed. You see Juan de Leon Fandino step onto the deck, his boots heavy as a verdict. He silently goes to the hold, rummages, finds, and looks at you. You are a smuggler. You shout, "I have permission." He smirks, knowing the British forge papers like children draw money. Then he grabs you by the hair, knife at your ear, a sharp tug. Pain, acute and instantaneous. Your ear falls to the planks, blood dripping into the salty water. "Take this to your king," he says, "and tell him this is what happens to those who break our laws." You fall to your knees, pressing the wound. Your fingers tremble, your heart pounds, but you don't cry. You remember. But here's what the archives conceal. Spanish coast guards had the right to stop ships in their waters. It wasn't arbitrary, it was a system. Cutting off an ear was rare, but not an atrocity. In Coastal Guard reports, there are dozens of cases. Captains who defied them received a lesson. The body as a message, pain as a warning. For Madrid, it was a way to protect the colonies from British aggression disguised as trade. Jenkins wasn't a victim, he became an example, living, bloody, effective. Yet, why him? After the incident, he didn't disappear. He didn't swear revenge. He didn't retire to a monastery. He continued to sail. A year later, the Admiralty paid him £450 for his confiscated ship. Compensation, not revenge, not a scandal, just a settlement. Risk is part of business. For 7 years, the ear lay in a jar, silent, gathering dust. No one demanded war. No one cried about honor, because at the moment it wasn't a tragedy, it was a price. But by 1738, Britain was suffocating. The economy was in a nosedive. The people were apathetic. Parliament was embroiled in scandals. The opposition demanded blood, not money, not reforms, just blood. And so from the archives they retrieved the jar, took out the ear, placed it on the table, not as proof of contraband, but as a symbol of humiliation. You would have believed it too, because they didn't show you the accounts of London bankers. They showed you flesh and told you, this is honor, this is war. Remember, manipulation doesn't start with lies. It starts with choice. Out of hundreds of ears, one. Out of hundreds of risks, one victim. And you look at it, and you want revenge. Without thinking, without asking. Just revenge. March 1738. House of Commons. Silence. Heavy as lead in a ship's hold. Robert Jenkins steps forward. Not a lord, not a general, just a captain. In his hands, a glass jar. Inside, an ear. His ear. Floating in a yellowish liquid. He raises it, his voice trembling. "This is my ear, cut off by a Spaniard. He told me to give it to the king." The chamber freezes. Hearts pound. 1, 2, 7. Then an explosion. Shouts. Fists banging. Shame. Revenge. War. You watch this scene, and your palms sweat. Because this isn't Parliament. It's a stage, and the ear is the main actor. In this moment, truth is erased. Contraband, risks, treaties, forgotten. All that remains is flesh in a jar and anger. Pure, blind, irrational. You would have believed it too, because they didn't show you the Rebecca's cargo manifest. They showed you an ear and told you, this is honor, this is war. The press seized on the image. Newspapers ravenous, like dogs on bones. Barbarians! Monsters! They mutilate our people. No one asked what Jenkins was carrying. No one remembered that London paid him for the risk. Walpole's government remained silent, not because they didn't know, but because they needed that ear. The economy was gasping. The people were angry. Parliament was on the verge of collapse. And suddenly, a gift. One sailor, one jar, one gesture. The perfect diversion. An external enemy instead of an internal crisis. The ear wasn't proof. The ear was a smokescreen. But here's what makes this moment truly chilling. Before Jenkins, war started over land. Thrones, gold. Now, over a body part in spirits. It was the first biological meme of war. Flesh as media, pain as content. And it worked. Because you can't argue with an ear. You can only look, and get angry, and demand blood, spirits, glass, flesh. And now you believe, not facts, not logic, but a feeling. Like today, one image, one groan, one tear. You've been deceived again. But you don't notice, because your heart beats louder than your reason. And then, October 1739, Britain declares war, not over markets, not over colonies. Officially, over an ear, over honor, over duty. But on the decks of ships heading into the Caribbean night, sailors aren't thinking about symbols. They're thinking about whether they'll survive. And Jenkins? He's already home. With money, with silence, and his ear, in history, as a trigger, as evidence, as a lie dressed in flesh. Remember this trick. It's still in use. October 1739. Robert Walpole's cabinet. Rain taps on the window like the fingers of a crowd. On the table, a speech. He knows if he says no, he falls. If he says yes, thousands will die. He looks at a map of the Caribbean. He sees Veracruz. He sees swamps. He sees fever. But he also sees the crowd outside the window, and the press, and Pitt. His pen trembles, not from fear, but from calculation. He writes, "We must defend the honor of Britain." He doesn't believe it, but he writes it, because power is more important than truth. You would do the same if your position depended on a single word. Walpole had ruled for 20 years, avoiding wars, valuing peace like an accountant values balance. But by 1739, his authority was crumbling. Patriots cried, "Spain is mutilating us." Newspapers depicted Jenkins, a saint with an ear in a jar. Walpole knew it was theater, but if he didn't play his part, he would be driven from the stage. He chose war, not because he believed in it, but because he feared losing elections. Politics triumphed over strategy, as always, when votes are more important than lives. He read Admiralty reports. He knew the fleet was unprepared. The soldiers were not seasoned. Supplies were a disaster. He knew the expedition would fail, but he preferred dead soldiers to living disgrace. This wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. Cold, cynical. In the first 6 months of the conflict, Britain would lose 18 of 29 ships and over 4,000 soldiers, almost double the casualties of any battle in 10 years. For an ear. Would you have believed it if you knew your brother would die not from a bullet, but from dysentery in a Mexican swamp? War is declared. Bells ring, crowds sing, flags wave, but on the decks, silence. Sailors don't believe in honor. They believe in rum and in not returning home. Operation Veracruz begins and immediately collapses. Ships lose their way, soldiers lose their strength. Fever decimates faster than cannons. Commanders argue, orders are lost, and London remains silent. Because the ear has already played its part. Now blood. Real blood. Not in a jar. In the mud. You look at this and realize, the absurdity isn't that the war started over an ear. The absurdity is that it still works. You stand on deck, August 1739. Salt stings your eyes. In the hold, bread with black mold. Water, green and thick as slime. The officers are silent. You ask, "Where to?" A whisper in reply, "Veracruz." The ear. Why are we here? A week later, fever grips the first victims. Groans, vomiting, rats scurry over bodies. The air is a mix of rot and sweat. You cling to the rail, gazing at the horizon. You see no enemy, only heat and fear. By the time the fleet reaches Mexico, 1 in 3 can no longer stand. 68% are sick, not wounded. Sick. You are not fighting, you are surviving. The ear. Why are we here? The British didn't come to fight a war. They came to a play. The script was written in London, hastily, amidst the cries of the press. They thought the walls of Veracruz were clay, but they were volcanic rock. They had stood for centuries, held for centuries. The Spanish didn't fire. They waited, watched as the British drowned in their own sweat. The officers, not one with tropical experience. The cannons, rusty from the fog. The gunpowder, wet. The provisions, eaten by rats. Logistics collapsed. Strategy, never born. You are not fighting an enemy, you are fighting stupidity, a system that sent you to die for a symbol. The ear. Why are we here? The numbers don't lie. 18 of 29 ships, at the bottom. 4,000 soldiers, in graves. Not from bullets, from dysentery, from fever, from hunger. That's almost double the casualties of any battle in 10 years. For what? For an ear in a jar. For flesh turned into a slogan. Britain, an empire of calculation. But here, it succumbed to emotion, to a biological artifact. For the first time in history, a body part became the pretext for war. Not a treaty, not land, not gold, an ear. Would you have believed it? If you knew your brother would die not with a weapon in his hand, but with an empty canteen and burning eyes. But this is not the end, because in Europe, no one fights alone. One shot off the coast of the Caribbean, and Vienna trembles. Paris whispers. Berlin calculates. A local conflict, a spark, and the continent, a powder keg. By the end of 1740, everyone understood. The War of Jenkins' Ear was no longer about an ear. It was about thrones, about maps, about the future. But the soldiers in the Mexican swamps don't know this. They just die. And in their last breath, one word, ear. You also believe in symbols until you find yourself in the hold, until you feel the mold eating not just the bread, but hope itself. But this is not the end, because in Europe, no one fights alone. One shot off the coast of the Caribbean, and Vienna trembles. Paris whispers. Berlin calculates. A local conflict, a spark, and the continent, a powder keg. By the end of 1740, everyone understood. The War of Jenkins' Ear was no longer about an ear. It was about thrones, about maps, about the future. But the soldiers in the Mexican swamps don't know this. They just die. And in their last breath, one word, ear. You stand in the Viennese palace, November 1740. A draft blows ashes across the marble. Empress Maria Theresa is dead. Her daughter is on the throne, but the throne is shaking. France sees the Habsburgs are weak. Prussia demands Silesia, a land rich in coal and fear. Britain? It's already in the Caribbean hell. But now it must choose, stay in the swamp or flee to Europe. And Spain? It's not alone. With France, the Bourbon Pact, blood for blood, gold for gold. Thus, Jenkins's ear, floating in a jar, becomes a link in a chain that stretches from Jamaica to the Danube, and every diplomat signing a paper doesn't know he is not building peace, he is tightening a noose. Would you also believe that the system is stronger than people? Look at the map. Europe is not a continent, it's a web. Break one thread, and everything collapses. Britain and Spain fight over contraband. But France is obligated to help Spain. Austria asks Britain for help. Holland fears Prussia. And suddenly, every step in the Caribbean echoes with a gunshot near Prague. Not because of logic, because of honor, because of alliances stronger than steel. The system doesn't want peace, it wants balance. And balance is an eternal war on the brink. One push, and the dominoes fall. You don't choose. The network chooses you. And here's where it gets most interesting. The War of Jenkins' Ear officially lasted 2 years, but it plunged into an 8-year slaughter. The War of the Austrian Succession. Over 1 million died, cities in ashes, empires on their knees, all because of one ear? Or because the system turned a symbol into a trigger? The archives of London and Madrid are silent by 1741. No one remembers what they're fighting for anymore. But stopping is impossible. The system has taken the wheel. Like today, one tweet, one image, and millions rush into battle, not knowing why. Imagine being used, like Jenkins, your pain turned into a slogan, your flesh into a weapon. And when the weapon worked, you were erased, his name forgotten, his ear disappeared. But the war remained, in textbooks, in the mechanisms of power, in every new conflict where a tear is shown first. Then soldiers are sent. You watch, and your heart pounds, because you know you could be the next symbol. He died in his bed, quietly, far from London, far from the sea, far from the ear. Would you also believe that a hero would triumph? No. Robert Jenkins received £20 a year, a pension from a trading company. Not a medal, not land, not glory. Only a modest annuity for allowing his flesh to be turned into a weapon. His home in Wales heard only the wind, not the cries of the crowd, not the roar of cannons, only the whisper of the surf, and silence. Thick, eternal. The jar with the ear is a legend. The man is dust. The irony is that the louder they cried about his torment, the faster he was erased from memory. For a symbol doesn't need an owner. It only needs pain, visible, tangible, packaged in glass. And when the war began, pain became commonplace. Thousands of ears, thousands of eyes, thousands of lives. And then Jenkins ceased to be a martyr. He became an inconvenience, a reminder that it all began not out of honor, but out of contraband, out of money, out of lies. And the silence around him became louder than any parliamentary speech. Do you also think that after your feat, you will be remembered? Look at the archives. Not one of those who pounded on the table in 1738 came to him. Didn't ask how he slept. Didn't ask if the scar hurt. His role ended the moment the ear lay on the table. Beyond that, only the machine, and it doesn't look back. Today's ears aren't in jars. They're in feeds, in stories, in trends. One image, and you're already angry. One meme, and you're already fighting. But ask yourself, who is behind this image? A living person? Or just flesh, put up for sale of anger? Jenkins didn't know he would become a symbol. But you know, and you still believe, because it's easier to hate than to think. Imagine your pain being posted online, packaged in a hashtag, turned into a slogan, and then forgotten, like he was forgotten. You'll be left alone, with a scar, with emptiness, with the question, was it worth it? Remember, the system doesn't pay heroes. It pays for their use, and then it erases them, like dust from a blackboard. You stare at the screen, scrolling through the feed. Suddenly, an image, someone's tear, someone's scream, someone's ear, not real, but just as potent, torn from context, ripped from life, packaged in a trend. You freeze, your heart pounds, your palms sweat, and you're already angry, already wanting revenge, already believing. But wait, this isn't news. It's a pattern, the same one as in 1738. Then, a jar of spirits. Today, a screenshot in a story. Then, Jenkins. Today, a stranger with perfect suffering. Do you also believe in ears? This is how it works. The system can't sell you a war for markets, for logistics, for 20 million pounds of contraband. That's boring. It requires brains. And brains are lazy. But the body is honest. An ear, a tear, trembling lips. This bypasses reason. Hits you right in the gut. You don't think, you feel. And in that moment, you are swept up. The press, the politicians, the algorithms. They know anger is the best engine, faster than steam, stronger than gold. That's why they don't show you a bill from a London bank. They show you flesh. Yours or someone else's. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that you clench your fists. Imagine you are in Wales. Rain. A fireplace. An old man without an ear sits in an armchair. Outside the window, the howl of the wind. In London, new treaties, new deals, new banks. His name erased, his war forgotten. All that remains is a joke, the war of the ear. But he remembers how his fingers trembled, how blood ran down his neck, how the world turned his pain into a flag, and then into dust. You too can become such a flag, tomorrow, with one tweet, with one image, with one hashtag, and no one will ask what came before and what came after. But this isn't history. This is your screen, right now. Every day someone posts their ear, tears out a piece of their soul, serves it on a silver platter, and millions rush into battle, not for truth, for a feeling, for the opportunity to hate, for the illusion of participation. Absurdity hasn't died. It has simply learned to live in the cloud. It wears the mask of truth, speaks with the voice of a victim, and you believe. Because it's easier. Because pain is a universal language. But remember, the real reason always hides behind the symbol, behind the ear, behind the tear, behind the screenshot. You've already seen it. In the news, in chats, in rallies. One image, and the crowd roars. No one reads treaties. No one counts numbers. Everyone looks at the ear and demands blood. But ask yourself, whose blood? Whose pain? Whose gain? Because behind every symbol, an account. Behind every tear, a script. Behind every ear, someone who put it up for sale. Remember this trick. It works. For centuries. Now, in your pocket, your phone, the new House of Commons, your like, the new cry of war. And you, not a spectator, you, the battlefield. And until you learn to ask, what's behind this ear, you will be led by the nose, through anger, through fear, through a false sense of righteousness. So who is right? The one who shows the ear, or the one who asks, why?